Hello and welcome to another episode of Atomic Vinyl Reviews. My name's Jacob and today we're doing a review of a bootleg of the Mezco King Kong of Skull Island figure. And no, not you. I've already done a review of this one here, which is a Bandai Vinyl type version of this figure as a bootleg. It's kind of weird. We'll talk about him later. Go away. Today we're doing a review of this guy here, which is a bootleg of the actual articulated figure, which is really exciting because I don't think anyone has done a review of this figure yet, so that always makes me happy to be one of the first people to do a review of this particular bootleg. And yeah, nobody's really been talking about it, and surprisingly enough, it's a really good figure. So let's get right into it. I think sometime within the last year, Mezco Toyz released their official King Kong of Skull Island figures, which came in a few variants. This one is emulating the smaller 6 to 7 inch version, but they did actually release a really huge, like 18-inch version, which, oh man, I would so badly love to get, but they're so expensive these days, and even when they first came out as well. And there was a lot of hype around this figure just because of the fantastic sculpt work of this figure and the articulation, all that good stuff. However, this specific Kong design isn't from any of the movies, which is one of the reasons I wasn't really aboard the big hype wagon for this figure, because this guy here is actually based off of a graphic novel by a guy called Joe DeVito, I believe. I haven't read it or seen it, but I would love to compare the illustrations to how this figure actually turned out. That figure was, you know, a really popular figure. I didn't really feel in the mood to get that one again because it is kind of pricey, especially in my country. I think in the US they go for like $40 US, but here in Australia the only ones that I've been able to find online have been around the price of a Monster Arts figure, so in the like $120 to $50 range. Which, for a Kong that isn't representative of a, like, actual movie Kong, to me wasn't really worth it. However, I stumbled upon this figure on eBay. Now, I've also seen them listed on AliExpress, and I'm sure they'll come up on sites like Alibaba and Wish.com and all those sort of ones where you can buy stuff direct from China, especially the more dodgy stuff. And this is an exact copy of the original Mezco figure, except for I think this one is clearly a bootleg just because of the paint job, but there's some speculation over that because I have heard that the official Mezco one has also got a black and white variant, so maybe this one is just completely emulating that, although it is a bit weird when you got like Anne here and she's like completely white and all that sort of stuff. But I was actually really pleasantly surprised with this thing. For one, the sculpt is super sharp and really immaculate on this thing. Like, even though I'm not a super fan of this exact Kong design, which I'll touch on a bit more in this review, the actual figure itself, quality-wise and sculpt-wise, is really, really good. Honestly, I couldn't tell that this thing is a bootleg, especially in hand. This guy looks magnificent. The main thing that strikes you when you first see this figure is just the texture of the fur. It's just so lively, and I don't even think the camera is doing it justice here. For whatever reason, he looks a little bit more cheaper and a little bit more bootleg-like on camera than he does in person, because the dry brushing on him is a little bit more subtle and really just helps bring out those really cool details, and I just love it. So fur-wise, the sculpt is magnificent, and all the details on him are really sharp. There's nothing really in terms of the sculpt or the articulation or anything like that that would suggest that this thing isn't official. Now, there's a couple of telltale little signs in the paintwork that this guy is a bootleg, but they're fairly minor. The first being on this face, because he does actually come with multiple faces. He has a bit of an issue with his teeth. They actually painted the teeth as if they were really long, but they actually painted over the gums, because the top third of these teeth should actually be pink and gums and all of that sort of thing. So that's a little bit odd. And the other thing is that we just got like Andaro here, which is just plain white. As you can see, she's even like overexposed on camera here just because she's just painted so white that it's not really even showing up as any detail on her. If I kind of put shade like that, you can start to see a bit of detail work over her body there. But that's just a couple of little odd bits. But other than that, I really couldn't tell that this thing is a bootleg. The quality of the build of this figure is really up there with, say, like a really well-made NECA figure, I would say. Something like that. He actually feels quite similar to a NECA figure because he's heavy. I don't know exactly how much this guy weighs, but we can find out together. He is 96 grams, so about 400 grams, which for a like 6-7 inch figure is actually pretty hefty. Let's talk about his accessories and his articulation, all that sort of stuff. So let's start with what he comes with. So he does come with quite a lot of things. So he comes with like a little skull, a separate face with a different expression. So in my little unboxing you saw I was using this face here, which is what he came stock with. I believe there's other versions of this figure that also come with a completely like closed mouth, but this guy's got like his rearing teeth like that, and he also comes with, you know, the open mouth face. And he comes with a number of separate hands, so 5 in total, including the ones he's actually got on hand. Comes with a little Andaro figure, and he comes with a bone, which basically just looks like a plastic chicken bone. It's not very impressive. It's kind of weird that he comes with this. Must have come off from a really large dinosaur, because Kong is already huge if you see the scale that Ann is, but then imagine just how big the creature, or I'm assuming a dinosaur that would have had this bone that Kong can kind of hold and use as a weapon. Just kind of jam it in his hand like so. And he also comes with a set of chains that you can put around his arms. I'll go through these in more detail in a sec. So the great thing is, it's actually really easy to swap out all the little accessories on him, especially his face and his hands, because I was really worried when I first got this thing, or just even like knowing that you could swap out little bits, that it'll be really fiddly, because it can be really difficult on figures like Monster Arts figures and NECA figures when you do want to swap out details on them. However, this Kong here, luckily, it's actually pretty straightforward. You just kind of tug on his face like that, it comes off. It does take a little bit of effort to pull out, but it's not too loose, and it's definitely not too hard, which is so good, because then you can just get your other face, for example, and you just jam it on there, and you can see it's just got this barbell style double ball joint thing going on, and you just find the little hole there, and you stick it on, and takes the perfect amount of pressure, I'd say, to push it on. So that's really, really cool. And then you got him with his other little face here, which is just lovely that it's so easy. And it's the same thing with his hands. You just kind of pull them out like that, and you can put in his other hands, and you can give him these little fists for, you know, either punching dinosaurs, his chest, or like knuckle walking and stuff like that. I'll just show you all the hands. So he's got more right hands than he does left hands. He's got this more open right hand here. He's got a punching left hand and sort of a gripping left hand. And he's got a punching right hand and then like a slightly more gripping right hand that can hold Ann really well. I do wish he would come with the third face, which is the sort of more resting face where he's got his mouth closed and stuff like that. I mean, he still looks a little bit crazy with that one as well, a little bit sort of grumpy looking, but I kind of feel like Kong as a character, he's not always like a super angry, menacing creature. He actually has some pretty chill moments in the story, and just like he can be really playful as well. And I really wish we got that kind of an expression for this guy. If he had a little bit more of a cheeky face, for example, that would be really cool. But again, this was a bootleg that I got for, in total with shipping, about 50 Australian dollars from China, and it arrived pretty quickly and was all good, fairly well packaged, and is a really quality figure. So for that, I'd say he's very worth it. Now we can kind of go over his articulation. I think he has really great articulation, actually. The ball joints on him are really smooth, and they work really well and hold their pose nice and firmly, which is something that, as a bootleg figure, you really worry about. So if we just kind of move all his little accessories out of the way, which thankfully there's a lot of, we can kind of play around with him for you guys, just to show you how he articulates. He's got these really big shoulders with these nice joints where you can see they got the little hinge joint or whatever it's called there, and they can move out like in and out like that, and they can also swivel, so you can get a good range of motion at the joints, and they feel really firm and secure, so you're not going to worry about those falling down easily from any light pressure, and they don't feel too stiff either, which is something I heard a lot of people complaining about the official figure. So the fact that this guy has actually got really nice, firm, but like smooth joints is such a great surprise. He has a similar joint going on in his elbow here, where you can see again the little circle there, which thankfully they actually dry brushed a little bit, because I hate it when they leave these unpainted, when they have that little joint bit of plastic there. But they're a bit dry brushed so it doesn't clash with the paintwork. And these also are nice and smooth, and they hold their position pretty well. And when I was doing my unboxing, for whatever reason his arm was like backwards, so I was trying to like move it forwards like this, but when it actually moves, like, would have had to move like that. So that's why I was kind of worried that his arm was stiff. I just had it round the wrong way. So that's how that works. Unfortunately, he doesn't have like a double ball joint in his elbow, so he can't really put his arm in more than that, but it works fairly well for what it is. And we got the same on the other side, obviously. And you saw how his head articulates, so it just is able to move side to side like that. It's a good range of motion there, actually. You can move it quite high up, which is really good, and about that much down, which isn't very much, but is about at eye level when he's doing that. And he's got a nice ab crunch and a swivel at his chest here, so you can move him up. So he's like that. You can move him down, like so, and it can just swivel around all the way. And the hips and the legs are a little bit less articulated than the rest of them, but they are also on ball joints. This leg tends to pop off. Not that I feel like it's a particularly loose joint, it's just that I'm a little adventurous when it comes to trying to articulate this leg here. But you can see in there, it's got that round ball joint that just is attached to the top of his body in here, and it's like, again, a double barbell style kind of a thing. So it can move around like that, and that just pops in on his leg. But you can get a fairly good range from his hip if you really work it and know how to articulate him there. You can get him to do weird sort of stances like that. He doesn't have as much motion in the knee, but he does have a little bit and a good swivel there. He's heavy again, like I said, so when I'm doing that, that's probably why his leg falls off, because I'm just holding him by one leg. But again, I can just kind of show you his knee articulation. It is a bit limited, but he has a really good articulation around his feet, because they are also on ball joints, so he does have a good ankle pivot. And that really helps stabilize this guy when he's standing, because he's actually pretty easy to get standing on his own without having to worry about him falling over, which is really great, because with these bipedal type kaiju and different figures, it's always a bit difficult to get them standing. I've had a lot of issues with other Kong figures always toppling over. This guy not so much. He's very secure. Let's take a nice close look at this guy's detailing, because like I said, he is surprisingly well detailed. So you can see here very clearly he is done in a completely grayscale type paint job. There's no color on him anywhere, so he's just a black plastic that's been dry brushed with some amount of different grays and whites and stuff like that. And it is really effective, actually. It does bring out the sculpt really well, and is really reminiscent of, say, a NECA figure's paintwork. And like I said earlier, it does look better in person than on camera, where it kind of looks like it's a little bit more rough looking, but in person it all kind of blends together with the natural shadows that you'd see just having him on your shelf and all that good stuff. So I think it is a really effective paint job, and you can see all that detailing in his fur. It's so magnificent, and you can really feel it when you're handling this guy. He's got a nice sort of sharp texture to him. Now he is made of a slightly sort of softer plastic, again like a NECA figure, something around that kind of a feel, but even though he is softer plastic, you can still feel the sharp little bits in certain areas, because he's made of a fairly thick plastic as well. It's got a really great face sculpt. Again, I swapped it to the open mouth there, where you can see lovely detailing on his mouth and his teeth, and those really expressive eyebrows, and all the little ridges and wrinkles really came out very well on this guy. Look at that there. This is where we come to our first little issue of the paintwork, and that is on his teeth and gums. You can see these 4 teeth at the front. The paintwork on them goes all the way to the top of his lip, and it makes it look like he has these really long, weird teeth. However, the paint's actually meant to stop about here, and the rest of it all above this little knife blade is meant to be one color as the gums. So that's a little bit of a paint issue there, and it's the most like striking thing on this that tells me it's not quite up to QC standards. And there's also a couple of little other issues, like some of the paint on the fang on this side is also a bit messy, and his eyes aren't perfect. They're actually not bad, again, especially for a bootleg. It's just amazing, actually, how good bootlegs really are these days, because I have had bootlegs that have just, like, really looked cheap and plasticky, and whereas something like this actually made the eyes almost look like they're, functioning properly, and they've almost done the paint perfectly on this guy. Like, they did the dry brushing really effectively. So you can look at him there. I mean, look at that. There ain't nothing wrong with that paintwork around his body. Like, it's very simple because it's just dry brushing, but it's really effective, especially in person. And I could imagine if somebody wanted to use this figure just as like a, say, like a model kit where they wanted to custom paint him, this is just the perfect base for a lot of customization. But even as is, he's a really decent collectible figure, I'd say. I wouldn't be able to tell that this guy's a bootleg unless you like told me that directly, unless I bought it myself and knew the price and the location and all of that sort of stuff, because this guy's actually really decent. So yeah, really nice. Get a bit of a closer look at the sort of articulation on him, how it works and all that sort of stuff like that. Got his punching hands here. Got his more open hand here, where you can kind of see the paint isn't the best. But honestly, I've seen NECA figures that have had worse paint jobs on them, and that kind of actually go for this kind of a look intentionally. So I don't think that's as bad as he kind of looks on camera. There we got a good shot of his face. Now let's bring in his other face. Clicks in really nice. So there he's got his kind of mean looking, like grinding his teeth kind of a look, where he's got his eyes are kind of squinting together and he's like just seeing something that he doesn't like. He's got that really sort of intense expression on him. Both of his faces are really intense looking, so like I said, I wish he came with a more relaxed face. Probably even something else than his like official relaxed face that came with the official figure I'd prefer. But I guess this is just kind of the face that we get, and the fact that he actually comes with this is just a great bonus anyway. The teeth are actually fairly well painted in here. Again, they just kind of dry brushed them in, which worked really effectively. And you can get some really great poses, and like if you're doing photography of this guy, like this would be such a cool little pose where he's like about to grab you or something. Although it would be nice if his hand was more in focus. But let's bring in some of these accessories. So the first is this little skull. You can see it here. It actually is detailed a little bit with paint, so it's not pure white. There's some grays in here, and they actually attempted to add a little black around the teeth, and they kind of airbrushed it a bit with gray, which is really nice actually. I'm not overly satisfied with the sculpt of this skull. I think it's a little too comical looking. In general, his design is a bit comical looking, I will say that. But the skull here could have been made a little bit more realistic. I think his eyebrow and the cavity for his eyes have some issues. Like his eyebrow bone is a bit too large. Like it's exactly the same size as the brow with the flesh on it, and it even has the lines and the ridges in it just like his actual face does, which is a little bit off. And the teeth on this thing are also a little bit too large if they're meant to be from a Kong about the same size as this. So it does come across as a bit comical, and his eyes kind of look a little too angry on the skull, because he should have sort of more neutral, roundish eyes for a skull, I'd imagine. Again, it's just kind of like my personal preference. I like skulls to not like look comically angry, if that makes sense. Next thing is this little Anne, so I'll actually remove her from this hand, but you can kind of see her there, how she does really neatly fit into that hand, and you can kind of mess with her pose so she can be strapped in a whole bunch of different ways. It's made of a soft plastic, fairly soft plastic again, very similar to the rest of this figure, so she's really easy to just pull out like that, and you don't have to worry about her legs or feet being damaged. She does have a nice amount of detail in the cloth on her body, which is really good. Her face is a bit derpy, because they actually did paint in her eyes and eyebrows and her mouth. I don't know how they painted something so tiny, but they did, and it looks really derpy. But, you know, if you repainted her, she could be really cool. She's got a great little sculpt on her. You can even see she's got one high heel and her other foot there that doesn't happen to have one, which on the official figure, they actually painted in that high heel white while the rest of her is just skin tone. So you can actually make that out a little more clearer than in this particular figure. There you go. Little nice scale and figure that can go with this Kong or any other Kong that you really want to compare this guy to, which is a cool little feature. But she is unpainted. She's kind of the most unpainted thing about this whole Kong. And one thing that tells me this thing is a bootleg, because even if this was in the black and white version of this Kong figure, like the official black and white one, I'd imagine they'd still actually use different tones of gray to mimic her skin tone and her hair and stuff like that, but this is just completely white apart from her mouth. Just really odd, but that's just how it is. Here we got that big bone. Nothing too exciting, actually. It really just does kind of look like a chicken bone, of all things, that was just like randomly included in this set. So that's really odd to me, but it's still a cool little accessory, and it's nice that you can give Kong something to hold and bash things with. And here are the rest of his hands, so the other three hands that I keep kind of swapping around during this review just to show you guys a bit of variation, but they're all basically the same kind of paint scheme. They're all really nicely detailed, and they're just, yeah, beautifully done. The punching hand there, and the sort of like semi-open hand that holds Anne. This kind of closed one. But yeah, beautifully done, beautifully detailed, and they full. In this little baggie, we have the chains that go with this Kong. So pour these down here. One of these chains actually tends to fall apart, one of these little bits. There's this little metal piece which does slide through this little hinge joint. And I do need to add a little glue or something, just a dab of glue, to make sure that it doesn't fall apart, because I don't want to lose that piece. You can see there's a little bit of metal in there, and that makes this hinge work. So if I dab a bit of glue on this side and this side, then the middle should have no glue in it, so it should still articulate, but it will stop it falling apart. But you can see there it's basically just painted black. I think they attempted a little bit of dry brushing on it, but it's barely visible in person. And he comes with this cool chain, which is actually metal. And this bit, I've heard that on the original one, it kind of clips together pretty well. But on this bootleg one, they kind of open really easily, which is a shame. But potentially, like, if you cover this in, like, some sort of thicker paint, like maybe nail polish or something, and let it dry, and then when you clip it together, there'll be a little extra material there, so it should hold together a bit more snugly. It's kind of a trick I use to tighten ball joints as well. We've just got the second one here, which this little metal piece actually holds in there, which is pretty good, but basically the same thing. And these, you just put on your Kong's wrists like this to emulate how he was at the end of like the classic Kong movie, where he was all chained up. Like so, and again, if they could hold on easier, this would be a much better accessory, but that's just a small thing that really needs just a slight glue or something to help hold it there, and that would be really cool. Briefly, I want to compare this guy to a few other figures in my collection, the first of which is this other Mezco King Kong of Skull Island bootleg figure. Now, you may have already seen my video on this guy. So he is made of a hollow hard vinyl, much like a classic Bandai Godzilla figure. It's really interesting pairing these two together because it looks like this one here was actually made using the master sculpt that was then used to make the original or official Mezco articulated figures. The reason I say that is because this guy is slightly taller. You can see more of the details across his body are showing and across his arms in the areas where this guy has all the articulation points. It's especially evident across his lab crunch chest area there, where you can see there's clearly this line here that breaks up the sculpt. However, when we bring in the vinyl figure, you can see there's no evidence there of that articulation point ever really being there. And if it ever was, whoever did the fixer-upper job to try and hide that seam line looks like they did a very professional job and not the kind of thing I'd expect from a Chinese company bootlegging this thing. So that's figures in general. Both of these are really good and really affordable for what they are, I'd say. I think I got them for like 20 bucks or something like that. 15 to 20 bucks. He was really cheap, and this guy, again, went for like just under 50 Australian dollars, something like that. For a figure like this, I'd say that was a really good price, and he's really well made for that, as goes for this guy here as well. Surprisingly enough, this Mezco figure has a pretty good track record of decent bootlegs. Here we have two Playmates King Kong figures. So we have the Playmates 2005 King Kong from Peter Jackson's King Kong, and here we have the Playmates Kong from the 2017 movie Kong Skull Island, and these are really good figures to compare to this Mezco one here, not just because they scale really well with them, but also because they help highlight some of the unique design choices that Mezco took with their version of the character. So like I mentioned earlier, this guy's not based off any movie Kong, he's based off a graphic novel, and I feel like that really feeds into this design. The main difference is this Mezco design has a much larger head and a slightly longer face, more akin to that of like a baboon or something like that. Whereas the typical sort of gorilla or traditional Kong designs have that more sort of rounded face and smaller heads as well. The Mezco one also has his head mounted lower down on his chest, so he barely has a neck or anything like you can definitely see with this figure here. His head kind of looks like it's coming right out of the top of his chest and going forwards, which gives him these really big, comically large shoulders. And he also has a much slimmer, more muscular waist, whereas the previous Kongs tend to have a more rounded, realistic gorilla belly. Here is the Rebor Vanilla Ice T-Rex figure, aka what is clearly a blatant ripoff of the V-Rex from the Peter Jackson's King Kong film. And it's a great figure to pair with this guy here. Unfortunately, my one is having trouble standing on this display base, but other than that, detail-wise, he is phenomenal, and he just, like, matches this guy perfectly, so they actually scale really well, and I could see them battling it out. This would be an awesome figure to pair up with your Mezco Kong. And lastly, before we get into our size comparison and my closing thoughts, I wanted to bring in some Godzilla figures for good measure. So here are two that I could imagine you guys might be curious as to how they scale with this thing. So the first is my NECA 1962 Godzilla. The reason I bring him in is because he's from the movie King Kong vs. Godzilla, where Godzilla fought a very derpy version of Kong back in the 60s. Great film, great fun. He actually scales pretty well with this guy, so if you have the NECA version, probably match this guy pretty well. And we have the 2019 Godzilla from NECA here. So this one's the one from Godzilla King of the Monsters. And the reason I bring him in is because this design of Godzilla will be fighting a version of Kong in the upcoming 2021 movie, Godzilla vs. Kong. So we're all very excited for that, and I just figured I'd put these two together just to see how they pair up. And unfortunately, this Kong is freaking way too big compared to Godzilla. I always just picture Godzilla just kind of needs to be at a good eye line with Kong or above. And super briefly, before we actually do the size comparison montage, let's measure this guy. He's at about 6.5 inches there, give or take a little bit, and that comes to about just over 16 centimeters. 16 and a half centimeters, something like that. So that gives you guys a good idea of how he scales up. Now let's get into that size comparison montage. that gave you guys a good idea of how this guy scales up with some of your other kaiju figures. To conclude, I'm really pleased to say that I was pleasantly surprised with this figure, especially as somebody who wasn't initially sold on the original Mezco figure. This guy has really shown me why that figure was so appealing. Granted, my main concerns about that figure were about the price and about this guy's sculpt not being a movie Kong. I'm pretty particular that if I'm gonna get a Kong figure, I really would like it to be from a specific movie. However, just as a figure, this thing is really well made. The sculpt work and the way that sculpt is then brought to life is so good. He's very expressive and just very dynamic, and there's so much posability with him. There's great little pieces that come with him so you can add on and play around and do all this sorts of stuff, and he just feels good as a figure. I could not tell that this guy was a bootleg, because aside from a few minor paint issues, such as the teeth or the fact that Anne is all just painted white, and maybe some lot of little splotches here and there, but basically nothing aside from that, I couldn't tell you that this was a bootleg. His articulation works phenomenally. The sculpt is really, really detailed. There's no evidence that it's really mushy anywhere. It feels nice and crisp, and it comes through really well. The rest of it's all dry brushed and painted through really well. Honestly, it's so amazing how good bootlegs can be these days. Like, I remember the days where a bootleg was just like a really, really shitty Bandai vinyl type thing. Even worse than you know, these things. And I actually like this particular bootleg Bandai vinyl-ish type one that they did of this Mezco figure as well. So that just goes to show that bootlegs are really getting pretty good. And this one is one that I do recommend you pick up if you are a fan of bootlegs, if you're a fan of Kong and you're not really able to get the official release, or just if you want a figure to customize or mess with. He's a well-made figure on this scale with this kind of build, so you can do whatever you want with him. He's nice and affordable and well-made. What more can I say? So that's it for this video, guys. I hope you liked it. If you do enjoy content like this, don't forget to subscribe, because that really helps me out and the channel out. And I hope to see you guys in a future video. But until then, may all your vinyl be irradiated vinyl. Over and out.